Hey, hi everybody, and welcome to this, which is our 45th Inspiration Exchange. And today we'll be talking about a super exciting topic. I think it's one that's really captured the machine learning community at the moment. I think 2025, there's been a lot of talk about AI agents, and today we'll be talking about the future of AI agents and genies, which you'll be hearing more about soon. So before jumping in, we just wanted to advertise once again that the Cambridge Center for AI and Medicine will be running a summer school from the 1st to the 5th of September. It's currently in the early bird registration phase, so please take a look at the lab website. There's some super exciting topics and speakers, so please take a look, and if you're interested, reach out or register on the website. So without further ado, we've got some super exciting panelists today. I think this will be a super exciting session, and allow me to introduce them. So the first person that we have is Dr. Shakir Mohamed. Shakir is a research director at Google DeepMind, an associate fellow at the Leverhulme Center for the Future of Intelligence, an honorary professor at UCL, and the founder of the Deep Learning Endowment. And Shakir, if you haven't known, is definitely a rock star in the machine learning community, and I think everybody on this call knows him. And then we have Professor Russ Altman, who's the Kenneth Fong Professor of Bioengineering, Genetics, Medicine, and Biomedical Data Science at Stanford University, as well as a fellow at the Stanford Center for Human-Centered AI. And Russ is definitely one of the leading faces in machine learning for healthcare and really at that intersection of pushing machine learning for healthcare forward. And I think we're really going to have a super exciting discussion. And I encourage everybody, please, to post questions that they might have for both Professor van der Schaar, which you'll hear from next, as well as our panelists into the Slack channel, such that we can take the questions towards the end of the session. So please pop those questions in such that we have the time to take those questions. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Professor van der Schaar.
Fantastic. So thank you so much, Russ and Shakir, for joining me. Every time we have an inspiration exchange, I ask my students to provide some names for the discussion and some panelists, and we always get amazing panelists, and they choose amazing panelists. But this time I got to present, so I got my choice. So I invited two people that I really love a lot to talk to. One is Russ, with whom every time I meet, a lot of ideas are sparking and a lot of energy and research boundaries are pushed. And Shakir, who I met a little bit less often, but every time we meet at a conference or we talk online, I'm excited and inspired. So thank you both for making the time. Today, I'm going to tell you about Genies, which is the next generation of AI agents. And I put together a discussion paper a few weeks ago. You can find this discussion paper online on our website. I hope that I entice you to take a look at it. This continues the reality-centric AI agenda that we have put forward in our lab for 20 plus years, and which a few years back we kind of summarized and put it online. And really this represents, in my opinion, a new way of thinking for the AI community. It's one that we have advanced it in our lab for decades, but still the AI community is a little bit more algorithmic centric rather than impact centric. And this is why I think pushing this reality centric AI agenda is so important. And this is why Russ and Shakir are fantastic co-panelists, because I think that they resonate with this reality centric agenda. Now, let us start thinking about Genies by envisioning a scenario. And this scenario exists online, a little bit more detailed than in this example, but I'm going to try to summarize it as good as I can. So let's assume a doctor, Dr. Maya Alvarez, which starts her day with her genie, Evita. It's her personalized genie. And this has evolved with her and her clinical expertise in a resource-constrained environment in her country. And when a puzzling patient presents itself with neurological deficiencies and cardiovascular anomalies, Evita demonstrates creativity and innovation by looking at a variety of data sets, genomic, environmental, emerging case reports, and proposes novel hypotheses. Leveraging reasoning, Evita formulates and defines this hypothesis, integrating global data from specialized genies in a variety of fields: toxicology, neurology, infection diseases. And on the basis of this, starts planning and identifying the most promising avenues to deal with this patient, and then Evita acts on them under the supervision of Maya to coordinate tasks and support Maya in her decision-making process. For instance, escalating lab work when symptoms worsen, orchestrating an emergency consultation among cardiology, neurology, and infectious disease specialists. And through communication with other genies of other specialists, it synthesizes insights from the various domains, enabling a swift and data-driven alignment on the best course of action. And crucially, what you see here is that Evita empowers Maya by continuously adapting to her reasoning style, explaining its suggestions and learning from feedback. And it's strengthening in this way the trust and transparency and ensures that Maya can be in control. By the month's end, the patient condition stabilizes and Evita's collaboration across the different specialties can inform new health and public health guidelines. So what you see here is that Evita, the personalized genie of Maya, is more than just the agents of today. It has creativity, it has collaboration abilities, human empowerment, and much more. I'm not going to go into the details of yet another example, but you can envision this not only in healthcare, but also in areas such as business and many others, science, for instance. And such examples are currently co-created by our lab together with a variety of industries. And I hope that you, the people in the audience, are going to get excited and reach out and co-create with us such an example. But for Genies to allow all these capabilities and to allow this future to happen, need to have several core capabilities. First, they need to generate, they need to be creative and innovative. So Genies must transcend mere replication of existing solutions to truly empower innovation. So we need to move from simple generation to true creative generation of solutions. Also, Genies must be capable of planning and orchestrating complex, multi-layer strategies that are potentially taking a long amount of time, and they need to dynamically balance immediate actions with long-term goals across diverse and interconnected domains. Genies must also seamlessly transition from this planning stage to the execution stage, ensuring that these multi-layer strategies are transformed into decisive and adaptive actions in real time. Genies must also be able to reason and validate, and this is complex reasoning and validation, not like currently we see in the area, for instance, of math or code reasoning, where we know what the ground truth is. We need to ensure that ideas, plans, and actions in these complex scenarios that I described are robust, credible, and aligned with real-world constraints and knowledge. Also, Genies must transcend conventional transparency and interpretability measures by engaging in this dynamic, context-aware communication that adapts to the different users, their expertise levels, and the collaborative setting in which they are in. From that point of view, Genies also must be able to effectively communicate with other genies, with a variety of humans, and engage in dynamic and context-aware dialogues with these other humans and other agents, ensuring that their communication serves multiple critical functions, such as supporting planning and execution, co-creation of ideas, as well as sharing information and knowledge. In order to be able to achieve all of this, we also need to have genies that are lifelong learners. They are needing to constantly assimilate new information, refine their models, evolve their capabilities, and also do that in the context of communicating with other humans and other genies. And last but very important from my perspective is that these genies must empower rather than replace humans. They are designed to really empower individuals to achieve greater heights in their creativity, in their reasoning, in their actions, and go beyond what either genies or humans can do, thereby pushing really the boundaries of both. Now, in order to achieve these capabilities, these 8 capabilities, there is a lot of machine learning that needs to happen. And what I have done is I put online in this discussion paper 101, so a lot of different questions, which I believe machine learning must answer to unlock the potential of AI. Now, I may make you laugh, but I started with much more than 101. I started with around 165 of them. And I needed to oblige myself and curate to, like a director, to cut. And I arrived to 101. But you may discover other ones. You may like some, you may not like another. But I really believe that answering these questions is quite important. And I also believe that each question in this discussion paper is worth a PhD thesis. And to convince you that this is the case, I want to take a few examples. So let's take the first question, which is, how can Genies systematically explore uncharted knowledge regions in an open-ended manner to uncover genuinely novel yet meaningful insights or breakthroughs? The reason why I think this question is interesting, and I started even with it, is because most machine learning methods today excel in these more narrow and predefined settings. And they rely on large labeled data, well-structured goals, well-structured state spaces. The question of systematic open-ended exploration that I put in here demands really an approach that's unshaked from these fixed objectives or neatly labeled data. And uncharted knowledge implies unknown unknowns, meaning that the system really must hypothesize and seek out entirely new domains or patterns, not just exploit known signals. And generating this type of ideas, generating useful or meaningful novel insights is hard. And being creative, doing this creative exploration is hard. And the reason this is hard is we need to do that practically. We need to have practical relevance. We need to ensure that the insights are not trivial or random in order really to move the frontier. So this requires new ways of thinking because we are moving from traditional machine learning that's done on well-defined objectives into this open-ended exploration where the objective itself can evolve or remain partially unknown even, shifting based on the discovered phenomena. And this demands new learning goals that can be self-invented by the agent, by the genie, and dynamically adaptive. And even in the existing RL settings where we have exploration versus exploitation, this is already complex. But in the setting I'm describing here, in this uncharted knowledge setting, the system faces possibly infinite possibilities to explore. So hence balancing between these various scenarios, maintaining some type of long-term consistency is, I think, a very interesting challenge for us to solve. And I think that this is impactful because we lack also subjective, multifaceted value of importance, of what's important, and that may depend on the different domains, depending on the user feedback. Okay. And why I think this is so important is because any machine learning model can truly search off the map to find meaningful breakthroughs. And if such a system could do that, then we are capable really to accelerate scientific progress, make discoveries in fields such as medicine, engineering, and much more. And then genies can really become what I call partners in innovation. Now, this question is related to another question, question number 3, which says, how can genies recognize when conventional problem formulations are limiting and proactively reframe problems using more productive perspectives, such as shifting conceptual frameworks, adopting cross-domain analogies, or leveraging adaptive modeling approaches? This question, I think, is important and out of the box somewhat because it requires AI not only to solve problems, but also to critically assess and redefine them. It produces a metacognition layer, pushing ML beyond the static problem solving that we have today. So usually in conventional ML workflows, we assume the problem is fixed, the problem is given. And recognizing when a particular framing or formulation is hindering progress and how to redefine this problem such that we make progress goes far beyond standard ways of thinking in machine learning or optimization. And a genie that can detect constraints, incomplete definitions, or assumptions that may be unuseful or outdated really must question the goal and the formulation as well. And what I find exciting about this is that we need to balance innovation and feasibility again. So radical reframing could lead to intractable and probably overly ambitious goals. And since a genie needs to find productive redefinitions that remain grounded in data constraints, domain knowledge, real-world constraints and practicalities, and hence a genie must consider multiple vantage points before deciding on a new formulation that is indeed better. And this is a multi-criteria optimization challenge at the problem definition stage, rather than at the solution stage, which we currently do in ML. So this is, I think, exciting. Let me now give another example, and this is question 47, which says, how can genies leverage introspection and meta-reasoning to continually evaluate and update their reasoning models, transforming initial priors into redefined posteriors through iterative experimentation and real-time feedback? The reason why I think this requires new ways of thinking for us, the machine learners, is because genies will need to monitor two distinct loops. First, we need to learn at the object level, the task at hand, but then we also need to learn at a higher level, at the meta level, where the genie's approach to solving tasks is changing. And designing such a recursive structure with potentially infinite reflection depth is challenging and, I think, pushing ML to the next frontier. So another question associated with this is some type of self-assessment or self-reflection. For instance, how does a genie detect that is wrong, that it has a bias or an error in their thought? And traditional ML lacks such built-in mechanisms for self-critique, and hence new frameworks must integrate this type of error detection, knowledge gap analysis, etc. And finally, these genies must proactively design tests and queries to refine uncertainty parts of their own reasoning. So this implies using experimental design and experimental logic, but at the next level, akin a little bit how scientists do experiments to reduce uncertainties in their area of interest. The reason this is exciting to me is because in this way, AI can learn to think like a scientist. Through continuous self-checks and detection of errors, it can really improve the thinking process. And in this way, intelligent and introspective, why not, genies could operate long-term with minimal human supervision, improving themselves as tasks and data, and of course, human feedback is provided. Finally, I'd like to highlight a final question, and that's question 101, and this is how can genies track and evaluate the long-term impact of their empowerment efforts on users' cognitive growth, decision-making, and creative independence? So most machine learning is evaluated on simple metrics such as accuracy, F1 scores, rewards. But this question that I put here means some type of measurement of long-term human development, cognitive growth, creativity, improvement in decision-making process. And tracking outcomes over months or years is very different than how we currently evaluate machine learning. Finally, if you like, all these ideas, cognitive growth, creative independence, improved decision-making, do not have straightforward labels from which we can learn from. So again, this pushes our ways of thinking. And the reason I think this is important is because if a genie can genuinely foster user independence and creativity, really we are in a different paradigm where AI can impact personal and professional growth of an individual, thereby empowering us and improving us rather than replacing us. So I'd like with this to kind of finish with a call to action. I believe the future of AI is not automation, but rather this type of collaboration between genies and humans. And while today's agents are somewhat limited, and at the same time, there is a lot of, in my opinion, a lot of narrative to replace us, I really think that we have the opportunity to do something a lot more creative and more powerful, to build genies that are truly able to innovate, to reason, but also empower us, thereby becoming partners in our creativity process, in our decision-making process and impact. However, to do so, I think that machine learning needs to change beyond current paradigms. Too much is the same for the last 20 years, in my opinion. Yes, of course, we have deep learning. Yes, of course, we made enormous progress with large language models. But a lot of ways of thinking stay the same. And what I hope to incite you with these 101 questions, and again, you may not like all of them, but I hope that some of them you find interesting, and maybe you will add your own, is to really push this development in AI to the next level. So I think that this matters because AI should not just automate, it should elevate us, the humans, and should become intelligent collaborators that co-create with us. So this is a call to all of you to build an AI that can help us flourish as a species. With that, I'd like to kind of turn now to Russ and to Shakir and start by asking them a few questions. And maybe I'll start with you, Russ, but I'll have similar questions to Shakir. So my question is, shall we build genies? If we build genies, what for? What should they help us do? And what type of capabilities should these genies have? Do you think that some capabilities are more important than others? Do you think I forgot something? I'm keen to hear your vision, and then Shakir, maybe you respond as well, and then maybe we all jazz together.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And as I said to you in a separate message this morning, this is a breathtaking vision. So congratulations. I was so pleased to see that you found a way to channel all of your energy into this. And so it is breathtaking. So and I have many, many thoughts, and I don't want to talk too long. So I'm looking at my notes. And one of the first things that strikes me is this starts to look a lot like AGI, artificial general intelligence. And I don't know if you wanted to go there, but it certainly does, because if we build this system, and I do like your 5 capabilities, and I like your 101. I mean, I haven't memorized all 101, but they look in the right area. The question is, if we start to succeed in that, these partners start to have agency that is somewhat independent. Arguably, they have moral standing, which again is something you might not want to even get close to. But what they definitely will have is a legal status, because in both of your scenarios at the very beginning, these are helping and participating in decisions that are very impactful. And if and when they go wrong, the nature of the genie will become a question of legal significance. So I will let you decide if you want to talk about that, but that was like a very strong signal that I was getting during this discussion. Of course, you could say, Russ, give me a break. We have 101 PhDs. We are far away, so we have plenty of time to deal with these, and I would accept that. So let me then jump to the other end, which is kind of my engineer within me, which is questions for you, really, which is, I love that you broke down the 5, and I love that you broke down the 101. And there's a sense that those 101, the 101 questions, kind of map primarily to one of the 5. Like I imagine that there's some of those 101 are required by all 5 of the capabilities, but some of them are more geared. And so I had a kind of an engineering question, which is, do these components, do these reasoning components, the blue balls that you showed, the 7 or so that you showed, or 5, do they need to be fully connected? Is the system going to work in such a way that there needs to be a high bandwidth connection? Because that's what happens in our brains, right? As we're problem solving, we're switching to innovation mode, to execution mode. That makes the engineering more difficult, as you know, right? Because now we have an overhead, and that raises a bunch of other. So that's the first question, and that I'd love to think about, which is the degree to which these systems need to be fully connected, and also whether a modular engineering approach would be better. And then but the final part of that for me is what is the language that they will use to communicate with one another? Where people are building these LLM agents, there's kind of a language of English, and I'm worried about using English as a very clear language. Now, for number 47, when you were talking about number 47, you used very obvious probabilistic language. You said things like distributions and priors, and it was saying, "Oh, we're going to be a Bayesian." So 47 sounds like a Bayesian kind of problem. But other ones were much more symbolic, and so it makes me think. I'm excited about this. Oh, I'm excited about the whole thing, but it makes me wonder: how are these subsystems going to communicate, and do we have to do fundamental research on in the methods of communication? And if we don't adopt English language or language, human language, let's say, then how is it going to interact with its human partners? So, of course, as you might expect, I have more questions back to you than I have answers, but I think the high level
That's
is
typical Russ. Sorry,
exciting.
Shakir, I need to just briefly respond to this. Is typical Russ Mihaela fire chatting. So Russ, first I put this forward, and I'd like the community to think. I don't have the answers. I'd like all of us to think, but let me start by saying, is communication important? I think that communication will be very important, and communication to the human and communication among them. If you ask me at this moment in time, I'm going to say it will be natural language when the genie communicates with the human, but when the genies communicate with each other, I think they need a much more efficient knowledge, a way to exchange knowledge that will need to really be much more efficient, much more robust, much more compressed, much more parallel. We tend to be serial. So I think we should talk another language. And I'm actually quite keen to discuss with you and others about these new languages that will emerge, that these different genies that were trained in different, and maybe they will speak different languages even, because they are trained in different ways based on different. Then your question about, are all these components interconnected? I cut a few slides because I thought it would take too long, but in the discussions that I put online, they are definitely interconnected. I feel that this, like you rightly pointed out, there is a cycle there, and everything is connected to everything. And how to make this brain work for the genie is, I think, part of what's very interesting. And it's clear that when we are seeing something, a stimulus, we are reasoning about it, we are communicating about it. So how this circuit should work in a genie may be different than a human brain. And is this AGI? I want to stay out of that. I'd like to build AI that's empowering for humans. I don't know whether this is AGI or not, but definitely the ethical component is important. And I think I hope ethicists are going to get involved with us. But Shakir, your turn. What do you think? Shall we do all this? How shall we do it? Why it will be useful? Want to hear your thoughts.
Thanks so much. And it's great to meet you, Russ, and also just to hear some of those perspectives. You've heard maybe over the course of this year, you hear many kinds of language. This is the year of agents. This is the year in which all of these interconnected systems or independent systems are going to come together. So in some way, you have a sense that the general direction of research is to go in this way. So let's take from the beginning. It's clear we have, in some sense, all those capabilities in individual domains already. So now the question for us is, in what way do we bring those capabilities together? We can take any area, for example, the case study at the beginning. We have excellent methods for analyzing histology and x-rays, connecting that to patient data, to x-ray reports, and then giving that's kind of one capability. We have other things which look at EHR, make predictions, think of length of stay in the hospital, think of comorbidities, and that's a kind of different capability. And so now you're asking the question, well, what does the kind of integrated system look like? And in some sense, if we just expand, we probably can do a lot more of that kind of work. We can do a lot more kind of connectivity. And so, yeah, I think that, raises so many interesting questions that you asked. Like if we just pick up on the topic we just spoke about around communicate, to partner with people, if that's the real agenda, requires us to be really clear about what it means to communicate. and what the forms of communication are. And I think that's going to open lots of research on compression methods, as you said, if we're doing inter-agent communication. We can also expand that to think about embeddings research, which is actually a much more tractable, much more immediate area. But embeddings do become now a very common way to actually think about communicating between different systems. And then we want to think a little bit about the kind of trend we have right now around tool use, where you have agents that can make API calls into another system, and there's a kind of protocol which is already embedded. So in some sense, we don't need to really come up with new communication if we're thinking of technically. So that's at least with inter-agent communication. But if we think about people, people need to be understood. You can't speak always in the most technical language. You know, you can roll out that imagination in the medical sense. This agent also has access to all the research, but maybe your GP doesn't know the latest research, isn't trained to deal with that. What does that translation, communication, factuality, groundedness, all of those questions come to? So I suppose I come back to several questions in the end. One which you raised, like, what is the paradigm that we think we're going to do this work? Is that paradigm language models? And is that the paradigm to realize this kind of vision? I also do want to ask the question, if we really want to think about human flourishing, then do we need to build this integrated agent at all? And it's not clear that if we really are committed to flourishing, then that this is the right way to redirect finite resources, finite time, with the urgency of the kinds of questions of human flourishing and human safeguarding that we need in this day, in this age, in this particular political and environmental moment that we are in. So I think, you know, part of the value of this is that we can be a little bit more spread as a community. Some of us can spend some time thinking about those kind of more integrated, but we need to make sure that there is a sufficiently large amount that is actually focused on flourishing, focused on evaluation. And yeah, so you know, that's just a disconnected set of thoughts. I would love us to interrogate much more cleanly what we mean by all these words we use: validate, plan, reason, create, innovate. They are very easy to talk about. They inspire us. They make us think that these systems, these agents, are bigger than what they actually are. And then they also allow us to be unscientific in some sense, that they don't give us a grounding in the way we assess and be honest about our claims and evaluations and how we do work.
This is why, sorry to jump, Shakir. So this is why I put the 101 questions, because these words often appear in all sorts of, or AGI appears, or these keywords appear, and I often wonder, what do they mean? So part of the 101 questions is, let's try to break down what creativity means. Let's try what communication means, what empowerment means. So it's part of my attempt to try to break it down. And I hope that others will break it down through their questions, and we come up with a unified set of questions.
I do want to double click on something that Shakir said, because I wrote points in my notes as you were speaking, and I said there are some justifications for limited agents as an intermediate and maybe as a final state. And I think that resonates with what Shakir said, is about, we have to be careful about fully integrated, fully capable agents because of issues of control and all these other things that I was talking about. So how important is it to you, Mihaela, that we have an agenda that gets to full integration versus having the component pieces that we never actually put together for reasons of, let's say, precaution?
This is complex. So I maybe I'm wrong, but I feel that with the right safeguards in place, we do want to build these powerful agents, but these powerful agents which are by design developed to empower us. So how to do that requires thinking, but I personally feel that I need to learn faster. I need to think bolder. I need to be challenged. I often use these large language models nowadays to brainstorm with. Why not be taught by them? Why not be challenged by them, but at the same time me challenging them? And kind of, I do feel that a symbiosis in which human and machine can kind of align, if you like, and get stronger together would be an interesting one. But I'm very open to other possibilities, and I do take on board what you and Shakir are saying, that we need to be very careful when developing this, that we are not prone to manipulation by these agents, that safety is in place, that governance is in place. I'm very sensitive to that, and I think in my excitement, I at times forget the negative implications of this. It's just that as I grow older, I'd love to be helped to learn as fast as my students
I hear
can
you.
and be
I hear you,
excited.
and I share that. So let me say the one big consequence of this conversation could be reanalyzing your thesis with a question with this question: is it sufficiently human-centered in its design? So in healthcare, we had a clinic and hospital-centered, and arguably we still have clinic and hospital-centered world in the way that medicine is delivered. And patients are kind of at the periphery. And it has led to many problems that anybody who's ever been a patient is well aware of. And so, you know, if I could go back and redesign healthcare, it's clear, and there are many startups that are trying to do this, that it needs to be patient-centered. It's the patient who's the main goal. The patient is the main outcome, and the patient should be at the center. And yet that's not how we designed healthcare. As we begin to design these systems, I think it would be worth some time to say, what would a human-centered design engineer, if they looked at this vision, what kind of conversation would they have about how they might want to change our conception of the architecture? And that's not really my expertise, but I have friends who do this, and I know that they are routinely telling me, Russ, you're thinking about it the wrong way. So it might be fun just to do a check on the degree, because Mihaela, you just said this is all about helping and empowering the humans. If they're just like patients, if they're the primary goal and outcome, then we have to make sure that they're right in the middle of the architecture.
Sure. But there are multiple humans, yeah. So it's the human, the patient, human, the clinicians interacting with each other, is the hospital administrator, is the guy with the money. So to some extent, yes, definitely patient-centric. But let's not forget that in order to deliver care, there are different people who may have their own genies, if you like.
Yeah.
So the question is, really, how many genies? I often enter these discussions with some of my students. Shall we have only personalized genies? No, I think we should have personalized genies. We should have institutional genies. We should have governance genies. So and maybe different stories and different ecosystems. Healthcare, for instance, should be governed by the human. That's the patient. But let's be honest, incentive design is a problem, because the doctor may have their own incentives and has many patients. And
right, but even when the doctor has a genie, that genie will have to be doctor-centered, or it'll have to be administrative-centered. So yes, I accept what you say, that there's going to be many genies, and there's going to be a perspective on the world that's going to change based on who the genie, I don't know if you like this verb, who the genie is serving. I don't know if that's your model, but yes, but I do think we have to make sure that the customer, the person who's paying for the genie, if you will, feels well served and feels centered.
Maybe we even share genies, maybe you and I, Russ, are starting quite a big collaboration, so maybe we should have a common genie. Shakir, yesterday or the day before, when I caught you for a few minutes to discuss this session, you had some amazing ideas about genies in education and genies in conferences. Would you like to share a few with this audience? And then we'll start with questions. Please put your questions in the Slack to Russ, to Shakir, and if you have any for me. But in the meantime, Shakir, can you tell everyone this vision you had about education and conferences being reinvented and everything being reinvented in the era of agents and genies?
Yeah, so I thought what may be useful for our conversation, rather than always saying in the general, is like, oh, let's choose some particular areas that we would actually look at some kind of agents, assistants, genies. And so, of course, we are using medicine and healthcare as one of them. But the other area that I work in is around education. And education is a good one because it brings up this system that there is the learner, there is the teacher, there is the parent if it's a young person learning, and then there is sort of the education curriculum designer of these. So you have this very connected system. But what you may, some versions of this is, well, how do you now build the agent, which is the tutor that really helps support learning. The tutor that understands what the teacher's learning goals and instructions are, and then what the students actually want to get out of. And then we can use a lot of principles of learning science. And I thought this was good, maybe for one thing you mentioned earlier. You mentioned, I didn't write which number was, but about long-term cognitive growth. And in fact, that I think is one of the key questions of the underlying assumption of so many of these conversations. They are making an assumption that if you were to go and do all this integrated work, that actually what you will get in the end is useful and that it will lead to human flourishing. But we need to unpack that question a little bit more and really turn it into something that we can measure, evaluate, think about long-term outcomes. And fortunately, the field of learning science and the field of education is one that actually has given us a lot of ways of thinking about, well, what do long-term learning outcomes look like, especially in digital intervention domains, and how we can bring that closer. How do we do that kind of form of measurement? So I think learning
maybe
other fields of science and
Shakir, maybe personalized, because the reality is maybe we learn in
Exactly.
different ways.
Yeah, so they will be personalized. They may not be personalized. Sometimes you don't want everything to be personalized. So I think there's so much lessons and learning. So, you know, one area that you see, and then this is maybe going to the question, what is the paradigm of this integration? I don't think learning requires you to have a full-blown, fully cognitive system that acts, reasons, is all forms of creativity. Actually, sometimes we want them to be probably a little bit more constrained. I think that's another kind of debate to be had. But yeah, so I thought that was a very interesting kind of area.
Very cool. Maybe we debate
at,
for 2 minutes, because this is my chance to debate with you. Who knows when I catch you and Russ in the same virtual room. So the reason I think that they should be integrating Shakir is, at times, you know, as a genie, imagine I'm a genie, I'm trying to really to disambiguate certain things, and I'm trying really to explore in this open-ended way. And I realize that I have some limitations in understanding. I may, like a real human would, want to do to acquire some type of knowledge or open some type of communication channel, call you or Russ or some of my students and say, hey, I don't know how to do this. What do you think about that? So being able really to act, even if it's open channels of communication, not necessarily going, and potentially, why not, doing experiments in the real world in a safe way, but at the minimum, opening communication channels to debate points of view that I as a user don't have. So I feel that if we don't have all these different capabilities interacting with each other, we will not get to the full potential. But you and Russ can disagree with me, please.
It is a fascinating question. One potential outcome is that the system goes into a fugue state and never actually does. I mean, medically, this happens to humans, and we, you know, that's a major mental, dysfunction, and we try to treat it. We all have had students who go into fugue states and can't do anything. And so, but that's just a side comment. I do think that my instinct is always to be empirical about this, right? And so we could have an argument about maybe what this really boils down to is what is the order in which we do these engineering challenges. And maybe we build components and then we gingerly link up some 2 or 3, watch what happens, and then learn from that. And then we learn the rules for agent integration. Because I don't think we really... Humans have time constraints that we would have to simulate, right? Because it's like, you need to give me an answer. But we also have all of the, we're in a bad mood when we're hungry, or when we're tired, we're not affected. And so all of these things provide real world limitations on our decision making. So it's always decision making under limited resources. And so we have to figure out how to have those limited resources manifest somehow in these systems if they're going to be human compatible.
Yep. And also, again, there is the other model for all of this is that you never integrate these tools, because actually maybe what to support humans to be the human collaborator is to say, well, it is the human who uses their sets of tools, who makes choices about which tools are appropriate, and then actually through the process of working with them knows how to. That's a different kind of model, right? That's the opposite model of the integrate. And maybe you have, I think what Russ is suggesting, maybe a more intermediate model. Some things are connected, some things are. It's not it's not clear. And I do think in the space of, come back again to learning needs to be difficult at times. It needs to be challenging. We need to be vulnerable. There's all these other elements which I don't think need you to be learning about the Krebs cycle or to it depends what we are learning, that where the kind of tasks changes. So I think it does a good space, and then also can give us this kind of empirical question. So then the question, I think I do like that. If we were now to design a research program, how is it that we're going to actually do that? Well, then we need to assess, well, what's the kind of the biggest blocker for us doing some of these things? And maybe Russ has given us the answer. Well, the most difficult thing would be to see that, can we meaningfully, safely integrate some of these tools in some way? And maybe that has been answered already, but I would say the biggest blocker for us is to actually show that they can actually provide actual benefit to people. Because I don't think the evidence is not that you get benefit. The evidence in medicine is that you get more bias. The evidence in housing is that you get more discrimination. The evidence in surveillance is that you get more marginalization. So I don't think any individualized group who is using the evidence of lawyers, of journalists, of authors is that their work gets stolen, right? The evidence of researchers is that you get fake citation. So I don't think the evidence is piling up in this kind of positive way, and we need to really balance the evidence out.
I'm more positive than you, Shakir. I feel that if we are correctly building this type of genius could be empowering. And I hope that these questions that I put are also interesting from a machine learning point of view to really push. Part of my agenda was, some of it was societal, and I'm on the belief that if we carefully think about these issues could be benefit. Another thing is to the geeks in the community to really get them unstuck. I feel too much happens in the same paradigm. I often say, controversially a little bit, since my lab worked for 20 plus years in multi-agent RL, hey, we didn't change anything in these 20-something years. It's time for us to get unstuck. But I need to stop, even though I would have loved to talk to you, Shakir and Russ, forever. I promised to Nabil that I give the floor to him and to the participants to this. I would have loved that we grab a virtual, I don't know, coffee or glass of wine and we continue. But I need to give you back to Nabil. Nabil, as promised.
Thanks for that, Mihaela. And I think the discussion has been super exciting, and I think that's definitely reflected in the number of questions that we've got in the chat. And I think we should really open it up to all of the people who've asked very many excited questions. So what I'll do is I'll read out the person's name, and if they'd like to unmute themselves and ask the question, either to Professor van der Schaar or any of our panelists. And if you are unable to, please just note it in the chat and I can read it out. And apologies in advance if I do butcher somebody's name. So the first person we have is Raghavendra. If you'd like to unmute yourself. I guess if not, I can read the question out. So the question is that reliable agents might soon help ease workloads in places like hospitals and hopefully save lives. How do you see it possible to enable reliability while ensuring faster reasoning with lower compute? Because at the moment, current agents are quite expensive due to like recursive LLM calls during execution. And I guess the question is really around, do we think this is like an important area to be working on from a more computational expense and reliability perspective?
Sure, Russ will have something to say about that. Definitely, I think we should work on that. I think computation is expensive. I think we shouldn't burn this planet in training these models. I think we need to have scalable models. But also, I hope that maybe we find new ways in which we train, but then we just personalize, and the personalization part is much cheaper. I don't know, Russ.
So this is not my expertise, but I am at Stanford, and my electrical engineer colleagues are working extremely hard to develop the next generation of hardware to fuel all this. And they must succeed, right? We need them all to succeed. And it's things like going back to analog computing. It's all very exciting. It's all very new, but there are theoretical reasons to believe that in something like 5 or 10 years, let's say 10 to be pessimistic, that the data centers that are being built will not be necessary. And I don't know if that's true, but I am banking on that being true because otherwise we have a big scalability problem. So in all of my work, I assume that smart people are going to provide the compute that we need. And if they don't do that, we have a big problem and I'll be dead. So it won't worry. It won't.
Scalable computation such that we don't get that, because I need you as a collaborator for many years. So maybe scalable computation, or finding a way in which something is trained up to a level and then only the final touch is done. New ways of doing computation as well.
But the more challenging thing that I do take responsibility for is the question about the reliability, with the lack, hallucination intolerance. And I'm also optimistic that especially in the sciences, this is where scientists might actually make general contributions because we care so much about truth and causality. That this creates a market in the scientific community to address all of those issues, and I think that will have knock-on benefits across the board because I think most of us will tolerate a ChatGPT or a Claude or a Perplexity that does crazy things every now and then in our regular life because we're around people all the time doing crazy things. But in science, where you need reproducibility, you need causal models, I think that's putting a very healthy pressure, and I'm seeing a lot of really good work, and I think that has to happen because in a hospital, you're not going to be able to tolerate absolutely random things. You will be able to tolerate limited, there'll be little boxes you can put around it, and there can be uncertainty within those boxes, but you can't have too many black swan events or it just will never be approved and used.
I'll just add, I don't know, you can maybe split this up into different kinds of research. I mean, this kind of a question is one where you can't say, of course, this field is important, right? So that part of the question is given, but you can maybe split the research question between sort of something you mentioned earlier. Well, reliability is maybe dependent on this question of metacognition, having forms of uncertainty in decision making, and that's able to reason a little bit faster, deal with a little bit less data. So data efficient learning is again going to become a very important topic. Issues of causality and causal reasoning, causal judgments. We as humans have a lot of shortcuts in our psychology through the mechanisms of intuitive reasoning, intuitive physics, intuitive grammar. So these kind of intuitive learning mechanisms become important. And then you can sort of separate that into a kind of systems research. In sort of systems research, we separate the questions of training a model from questions of serving a model. And both of those are different. In training the model, equally the work of coming up with more efficient optimization methods that don't require so much manual tuning of learning rates, don't require such long time, but allow us to take larger jumps in the right kinds of ways are going to be important. Serving is going to be important. I'll just give the counterpoint, though, to all of this is often what's called the Jevons paradox, which we're having in climate sciences, where you reduce the demand for you create an efficiency in a particular area, use less carbon of a particular topic, but because of the economics, then you end up using more demand, and so the aggregate total amount of CO2 remains the same. And probably the Jevons paradox is going to be something really going to affect us on questions of efficiency. So we may build more energy efficient chips, we may serve them faster, we may be able to build models that are much smaller with the same amount of time using things like quantization or other kinds of bit streaming methods, more efficient training, but then we'll build bigger models, or we'll just build more models, or we'll try to use more data. So, I think there's just sort of what kind of pressure, and that's now a bigger question. That's beyond the technical question. It's sort of when do we think something is enough? And I don't know whether it's the last time you saw that example. There is a sense of
Shakir, Do you think, sorry to interrupt, but do you think that maybe, to both you, Shakir and Russ, do you think that there could be different types of genies or agents with different types of computational performance trade-offs, you know? Because one is the one for me, which maybe it's trained somewhere, but then I just personalize and just feed it with my personal data. Something else is a super genie that a government can have or a country can have. Something else is an institution. So maybe there are different platforms that can emerge where both the data, the governance, but also the computational ability may be different. I don't know.
Absolutely. We've seen this in the marketplace. There's going to be Genie Lite, which is going to be free, and then Genie Pro is going to be expensive. And Genie Super Pro will be fantastic, but only available, to I make it as a joke, but this is how we've seen things roll out for the last 20 years.
Unfortunately, this is where what Shakir says is spot on. This may lead to inequalities, which is exactly what we don't want to.
And you already see this if we just bring it to the technical area. You are going to do model distillation, or you are going to try and build capabilities in a smaller model. What you do is you use a larger model, you generate synthetic data from the larger model, and then you use that. You've seen this in medicine, everything on X-ray analysis does it this way. So, we already had that paradigm is already there. So it's not something we need to imagine. So and that's actually a very good way, right? So sometimes maybe we can build one, invest energy, expense upfront, and then maybe that can be made efficient or used or shared in other kinds of ways. So, yeah, we have that model already.
Awesome, thanks for that. And then I guess to the next set of questions, and maybe Matthias and Jeremy, if you could both unmute yourself and ask the questions, because I think both of the questions really hit on the point Shakir brought up around evaluations. And Matthias, I know yours is around more automated evaluation, and Jeremy, yours is around more like human supervision and human eval. So maybe both of you can ask the question together, and then we can like join it up on the answer side.
Yeah, it's my turn, and my question is, how can we effectively compare the AI-generated diagnosis with those made by human specialists? What are the best evaluation metrics for assessing the quality of AI-generated diagnosis in clinical reports? Should we really on traditional NLP metrics or something medically relevant measures like F1 score?
So I'm going to answer this very quickly because I know we're running out on time, and I'm a doctor. I think that most of the metrics and benchmarks now are not adequate. They're fine for kind of playing around, but I think we're going to need to do clinical trials, and it's going to be how is the outcome of the patients. That is always what rules. And so when we are serious about this, it's going to be a careful, well-designed, safe, ethical trial where it's physicians and then physicians with AI, and we'll see if the outputs and the outcomes are better.
I wish that we could talk forever, but unfortunately, Nabil, I think time is up, and I know that some of our panelists need to leave. But maybe we should have a second get-together in some time from now.
This has been amazing, and it opens up many deeply technical, fundamental questions. You are right, there are many PhDs in actually every field of intellectual endeavor, and actually that's what makes it exciting to work in the field of machine learning right now. And that's always why we liked being in machine learning, because we got to touch on so many different fields and learn to grow, to make our contribution, to add our footnote in the history of science. So thank you so much. I'm very excited for what's going to come next.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Shakir and Russ, for being here. It was so much fun talking to you, as always. Thanks. Nabil, you need to end.
Yes, and thanks so much, Shakir and Russ, once again. And thank you, everyone, for joining. And please join us for next month's session, where we'll be delving more into agents, but more so on agents and communication. So we look forward to seeing you next month.